Welcome to our last lecture in Economics of Innovation. Today we will capture or cover two chapters, namely two-sided markets and platforms, and finally a chapter on innovation and antitrust policy with a special focus on merger policy. Next week we won't have a lecture because there I'm looking forward to your presentations of the case studies about pharmaceutical research and how research and development works there. So I want to start right now with this two-sided markets topic, and as you notice, I only loaded up the respective slides some 15 minutes ago, so in a sense it's hot out of the printing press. You will see in a minute why it was so delayed, but hopefully you still were able to download them. Anyway, you'll see the slides here. Okay, what are two-sided markets? This is a rather topical issue because if you think of all the largest companies, or in terms of stock market valuation, the largest companies or the most valuable companies are companies like Apple, who provide an operating system and apps with their Apple. Facebook is very important, Amazon is important, and so on. Microsoft as well. They are all in some way or the other are platform operators. What are platform operators? These are intermediaries that provide a platform where buyers and sellers meet or interact, okay? Or more generally, various groups of agents with some complementary business. So what is well known, of course, is the Google example with the search engine. They bring together users who look for searches or who do searches, and advertisers, social networks such as Facebook or Instagram, which do actually the same. They bring together users and advertisers. You have exchanges like the Amazon marketplace. So if you buy something from Amazon, you can buy on Amazon from companies which are not Amazon, okay? And this is right now really an important business for them. Somehow older is eBay, where you just have buyers and sellers. Then you have the standard kind of matchmakers, which provide you a one-to-one matching, like the dating and partnership platforms like Parship and Elite Partners or Tinder. I don't know what currently are the most important ones. Uber would also provide you, if you want to have a taxi ride, they bring together the passenger and the driver, okay? So we have to distinguish these platforms from what is standard kind of dealers, which is standard kind of retailers. If you go to your grocery chain like Aldi or Rewe or Edeka, they also bring together buyers and sellers. The sellers are the manufacturers. However, they have a different business model. These intermediaries buy the goods from the suppliers and then resell them to buyers, okay? So this is, Amazon is also doing that. If you buy something directly from Amazon, a book or whatever, or some refrigerator or something like that. Alternate, here in Gießen, you might just buy some computer equipment, or I don't know whether you buy your shoes from Zalando, which would be a standard vertical industry structure. So Zalando doesn't produce their shoes on their own, and they don't bring directly together the shoe producer with the manufacturer, with you as a customer, okay? And you have standard problems here in terms of double marginalization and so on. A topic we will discuss at some issue, or we discuss at some issue in industrial organization, okay? Yeah, so our problem here, or now I want to present you how we can think about two-sided platforms and how we can analyze them. I just need to check whether my stream works. Hopefully it does, but we will see. Okay, so what you have on such a platform are two groups. We call them here for simplicity sellers and buyers. It might also be readers and advertisers, if you think in terms of newspapers and so on. And the platform might choose one of two different prices, namely a membership fee. Oh, I never been on some of these partnerships platform, but what I heard is that they charge you some membership fee, irrespective of the number of transactions, of meetings or whatever you have with other persons on that platform. Whereas on if you think in terms of, for instance, booking.com, the hotel reservation platform, where you have a transaction fee, that is, you just pay, or in that case it's the hotel, they just pay a certain percentage of the hotel price, of the room price, as a commission to booking.com. Okay, so you might have a usage fee, and of course here, if you have more nights, you pay more than if you have fewer nights. And so here the prices you can charge as a platform, both to the supplier or to the seller or to the buyer. In terms of Google, for instance, if we do some searches, we don't pay anything, but the advertisers pay for the ads. Okay. So this should be clear, and I just want to explain you what kind of pricing we could have on such a platform in more detail right now. Okay, so we start with a monopoly platform, and we assume for simplicity that this platform produces with zero marginal cost. Okay, that's not such a restrictive assumption. We assume that we have positive indirect network effects that will become clear in a second. That just means that, it just means that the advertisers on Google benefit if Google has many people doing search there. These network effects might also be negative in a sense. If this advertisement is a nuisance for you, or it annoys you, then of course this would be a negative indirect network effect. But in many cases, it would be a positive. Of course, if you think in terms of a standard example of platforms like a nightclub, and if hetero people meet there, men typically have an increased utility if there are more women in it, and vice versa. Okay, that's what the indirect network effect would be. And the question is here that the socially optimal access or membership fees typically would involve a subsidization of both sides of the market if, of course, only we have this indirect positive indirect network effect. Okay, and we will see how that works out in more detail a little bit later. So if we look first into this case in which the intermediary sets only a usage fee, we have the following situation, namely that if buyers and sellers internalize any change in the price structure, the structure of the usage price is neutral, and only the total level of the usage fee matters. Okay, I think it's easiest to just look into this case. Actually, what I tell you now pretty much is based, or you can find it in this IO textbook by Paul Beflam and Martin Peitz. And here we look into the credit card industry. Credit cards bring together whom? Merchants and buyers. Okay, if you merchant might also be a restaurant, of course. If you go to a restaurant, you can go there and pay by credit card. Okay, and and of course a credit card is a good thing only if the merchant accepts a credit card. So in real world we have several of them, and it might not be that they accept everyone, and it helps only the merchant if the potential buyers also have this respective credit card. Okay, and now if we look into the credit card industry, of course we have two groups of buyers, some who only pay in cash and others who only pay in credit card. And suppose we have only a single credit card company that represents this platform. Okay, and we have one price per transaction. Might be you pay say 20 cents per transaction, or say 0.01% of the value of each transaction. Then if you have a nose, the interesting thing is here in terms of our discussion, who really pays these fees. Suppose it would be 10 cents for each transaction. Then it only matters whether it's a 10 cent and not whether 5 cents is paid by the merchant and 5 cents is paid by the buyer, or whether 10 cents is paid by the merchant or 10 cents is paid by the buyer. If the seller is allowed to charge different prices for people who pay with credit card and people who pay with cash, it just doesn't matter how these 10 cents are distributed or allocated among the two groups. Because it's clear you will always, if you have a credit card, you will always pay 10 cents more. Okay, because either if it's only the seller who pays, he will just add this 10 cents. If only the buyer pays, of course she has to take into account that he has to pay 10 cents more if he pays by credit card rather than by cash. Or if it's somehow intermediate values, they just will take that into account. And that's actually what we mean here by internalization in their contractual relationship. However, you might remember, or I don't know whether you know that, but there is very often a so-called no surcharge rule imposed by these credit card companies on merchants. And that no surcharge rule tells the sellers, the merchant, if they want to accept this credit card, they have to set the same retail price for cash and non-cash buyers. Of course, now it's a different here. Now not only the total price of a transaction, but the structure of this usage fee matters, because if you are a buyer and if you know and only you pay that, of course you have to take that into account, and many fewer people will use the credit card. If only the merchant has to pay that, it might be that first of all more buyers might use the credit card. And on the other hand, of course, you have to think hard about whether you accept a credit card as a merchant. Okay, hopefully this was clear. We are going to the next problem or part where we look into membership fees. And here I present you the Armstrong 2006 model from the RAND paper in some more detail. It has some complications I will show you later on, but apart from that, it's rather straightforward, I think. So this is more like an example with, say, a nightclub, and if you enter that and it's important for you that many people from the opposite sex are there, or might also be a newspaper where you have many readers, which is good for advertisers, and it might also be the other way around. Okay, so our starting point is we have a single intermediary who hosts a number of buyers and sellers on its platform, and we have indirect network effects. That's what I already told you. And the surplus of a seller, that's what is here, the surplus of a seller denoted as VS, it depends on how many buyers you have on the platform. And from each buyer, NB is just a number of buyers, and from each buyer we just assume that you have a certain benefit pie. Okay, and so the total benefit, the total surplus from this market depends on this number of buyers, and this is the indirect network effect. Okay, and of course it also depends on the membership fee MS you have to pay in order to enter that. And in terms of our nightclub, or in terms of our partnership platform, this just means that if this pie could be just some probability that you really meet your favorite partner somehow, and of course the expected probability is higher if the platform is larger. Okay. That's just what we have here. And just the opposite holds for the other side of the market, which we call buyer here. Again, the buyer side, the surplus depends on the number of sellers you have. So if you're in partnership platforms and with heterosexual people, it would be just, it depends on if you're a woman, it depends on the number of men who are there, and if you're a man, it depends on the number of women who are there. And of course, the interest or the important point is that you might have different utilities from how much you value someone from the opposite sex. Okay, that's what we have here. It doesn't work so well for newspapers, because here in terms of advertisers, it's not so clear that that readers benefit really in terms whether this is really a positive network effect. Okay, and so this should be clear right now, because and this should be straightforward as well. So of course, somehow we need to determine how many buyers and sellers we have on the platform, and that's determined here by Armstrong in his model by a so-called free entry condition, where it just means here the number of people on the platform will be higher if their surplus is higher. Okay, and that holds both for buyers and sellers, and we get a unique number if we assume some heterogeneous opportunity cost of the joining the platform. I will show you an example in say 3 or 4 slides, okay, how you can think of that. But the point is, people are different in how easy it is for them to join some platform, and so given some unit or some uniform surplus and different costs, you just can determine the number of people on the platform. Okay, so this is what we want to do, and now you'll see it's rather straightforward once we have this, because then we can just set up the optimization problem of our elite partner or Parship. Okay, suppose this platform incurs some constant cost per buyer and per seller, or per man and per woman. They have to set up these, I don't know, surveys and so on. These produces some cost. And then, of course, your profit of this platform is just the number of sellers you have times the membership fee you get from each seller minus the cost you have. And the same holds for the buyers. Okay, so rather straightforward. Here the only revenue is you have from the membership fee, and of course everyone is charged a membership fee, and this membership fee might be different for here the buyers and the sellers, and the structure of the membership fees will be an important topic we will going to discuss later on. What Armstrong then did, and if you see later what problems you run into if you try to solve directly for the membership fee, you will understand that this is really almost ingenious. He expresses the membership fees as functions of surpluses. Just remember that Vs was n times pi minus ms, and we just put that on the other way around. So we can put then the profit in terms of the surplus. Okay, and of course these two equations are just what we derived on the previous slide here. That's what we have put, what we have here and here. Okay, that's what we have here, and we just rearrange it, and now we just substitute that into our profit function, this expression, and now you see again you have the number of people or of sellers on your platform, the number of buyers on your platform, and here now the total surplus. And what we are going to do next is just solve for the optimization problem, and that's always straightforward once we have a profit function, and once we know what we have to take the derivative with respect to. Okay. And of course, it's clear we just have to determine how much surplus we want to give buyers and sellers, and that has an immediate relationship to the membership fee. We know if we give them higher surplus, we have a lower membership fee. If we want a higher membership fee, that means lower surplus, okay, and therefore fewer number of people. What we are doing next is just taking the derivative here with respect to Vs and Vb, and that's what's done on the next slide here, where we derive the first order condition here. You see there was a mistake in the first equation. That's why I added this n prime s here. So here, actually, it's straightforward. If you take a derivative with respect to Vs, the Vs is here, so you get a minus ns, and then the Vs is also here, so you get n prime s times this value here. Okay, and the ns is also here, so you get ns prime times u times then nb, and that's what we have here. Okay, rather straightforward. Okay, it doesn't look so nice, but it's straightforward to calculate that. And the nice thing is it's really a straightforward condition, because you know that this is nothing else than, in a sense, the profit per seller here in this case, and we just can rewrite it because we know that this part was nothing else than our MB, okay, or actually it was MS here, and we just substitute that here, because then we have immediately again our prices in our first order condition, and by this substitution we got a really nice condition, and you see here it's just rearranged and substituted here, and now we can immediately solve that for the membership fees, okay, because you see here divide put this part on the other side, divide by this part, and then you see ms is equal to cs plus something, okay, and that's what we get here, and that's what we have here, and this is really so straightforward to calculate here. Okay, and because if you take the derivative, if you divide by this, you get rid of this here and so on, and you get a very nice result. And this result is the one we have here, and we have to interpret that. Actually, Paul and Martin helped us here. And what we have here is that your membership fee for sellers is just the cost of sellers minus something plus something, okay? Minus something and plus something. This minus something is the one here. Monopoly prices are equal to cost, that's the first part, and they are then downward adjusted according to this external benefit exerted on the other side of the market. So here, if you're a seller, you get, in a sense, a discount because the platform knows that you produce utility on a buyer side. As and analogously, if you're a buyer, you get a discount because you produce a utility on the other side. Okay, and of course you have then, remember that n prime of v is of course positive. This is because if the number of people on platforms increase, if the value of the surplus increases, so this provides you then with the upward part. And I think on the next slide, on the next but one slide, you will see how we relate that to the demand elasticity in a sense. Okay, that should be clear, and we can conclude here. In a market with a single intermediary who charges membership fees, okay, transaction fees are different, or usage fees, the side of the market which exerts the larger external benefit on the other tends to face lower membership fees. So if U is larger than pi, the suppliers will have a lower, the sellers will have a lower membership fee, and so on. And so a profit maximizing intermediary may subsidize one side of the market, so to generate a higher volume of trade and therefore higher profits on the other side of the market. I will give you a simulation in 2 slides, so and this should be clear right now. But before we move on to this simulation, I want to discuss in a little bit more detail actually this part here. Okay. This, in a sense, gives us the monopoly part. We know actually that we will, in a sense, decrease VS in order, or compared to the social optimum, in order to have a higher price. Okay. Oh, that's actually what you see here. If you increase V, this will become larger, and therefore the whole expression typically becomes smaller if under certain regulatory condition. Okay, so here you see, just for your information, so here you can determine the elasticity. So if you look into the Armstrong's paper or Tirol and Rocher do similar things in their 2000 or was it 2003 or 2006 paper, and they use the demand elasticity in a sense for excess. Okay, that's what we have here, given the number of participants on the other side of the market. And here you have this n prime. That would be nothing else than our V, okay? And here divided by ns. So this is simply the n over the V times V over n, okay? Here we put it not in terms of V, but in terms of m, okay? And of course, m and V is related to each other with a -1 here in terms if we take the derivative, okay? That's what we are doing. Okay, and yeah, here we define that, and once we define this elasticity, we can show or derive the learner index here. And what we see is we get some standard result with the learner index. If demand is rather elastic for one side of the market, the learner index will be lower than on the other hand. And this is, however, a specific learner index as it takes into account, in a sense, already this indirect network externality. Okay, so here we have some pricing formula, and these markups are set as if there were lower costs, not CS, but CS minus this externality. Okay. Oh, I thought I changed this here. Yeah, okay. That's what we have here. So I will illustrate it in terms of a diagram later on, but the point should be if your demand is oh, actually we can check that in a few minutes. If your demand for access is highly elastic, you will get a lower markup, okay, a lower learner index. And I'll try. I didn't think that through, but I'll try to interpret my simulations in a few minutes with respect to that. Okay, what would be the social optimum? Social optimum, which here just means maximizing total surplus, and total surplus being profit of the platform plus surplus of sellers plus surplus of buyers. Okay, if we do that, as always, we come up with price equal marginal cost, and of course the social planner takes into account this externality. Okay, of course we run into trouble once our platform has we run seriously into trouble. Even if the platform doesn't have any fixed cost and only marginal cost, it will face losses. Okay, so somehow we would have then to subsidize this platform. Okay, yeah, that's pretty much what I told you. So these fees are lower than the fees a monopoly intermediary would charge. Okay. Yeah, so I thought that this is rather complicated, this indirect version over the surplus, and having or being not able to calculate the number of firms explicitly. That's I try to explicitly model this opportunity cost, and that unfortunately cost me some time. It's for a good reason that Armstrong didn't do that. For instance, what I did here, I used the net social surplus, and for simplicity, I just denoted this as V, and this is the same thing as we previously had, minus some opportunity cost of joining the platform. And this is, if you ever have heard of the hoteling model, this would be just like transport cost here. So there are people who don't have any cost from joining the platform, and there are people, so farther away you go, or the larger n is, or I is, the higher the costs are. They are quadratic in a sense, okay? And of course, somehow this V, that's what you see directly, the independent, or the user just indifferent between joining the platform and not, is the one who gets this net surplus of 0. And then you can determine this value of I. I is just if I is 10, the number of people entering would also be 10. Okay, that's what we have here. So tau s is just some parameter scaling these transport cost, in a sense, the opportunity cost. And what is clear, if tau is larger, it means that you have higher costs from entering the platform. And the same thing, so this is actually the same slide as we previously had. The only thing is I added these heterogeneous opportunity cost, okay? Where I just assume that this I is distributed uniformly, so we just can increase I and just set this equal to 0, and we get the n. The problem is that we get here and that this expression is only equal to n squared, and this is a really, if you solve these guys, this is a really ugly expression, which in Mathematica has 4 solutions. In the first instance, I thought it's only three, and then I never found the right solution, okay, because I always came up with a solution where if you increased the membership fee, the number of people on the platform increased. Okay, anyway, so I don't have to bother with my problems in setting this up, but anyway, I think it nevertheless will illustrate these things nicely, okay? So what did I do here? I just simulated this model with explicit quadratic transportation costs. I assumed some parameter values here, tau s and tau b. Remember, this is important in terms of how easy it is to join the platform, how good your internet connection is, how well you are, or what your opportunity cost and so on. And here I assume that pi u is just 10, and there are some costs for the platform to serve sellers and buyers equal to 1. In the first instance here, I assume that pi is not longer 10, but I varied pi. What does that mean? Okay, I just starting from the utility buyers get from sellers, I changed the utility sellers get from buyer. Okay, you know I just could jump back here. Here you see the value of the seller, or the surplus of the seller depends on this profit and of course on the number of buyers. So pi determines how much you get from each seller, from each buyer. Okay. How does the membership, how do the membership fees look like? And that's what is obvious. If they are identical, if they are 10, they are the same. What happens if we decrease the pi? What does this mean? If we decrease the pi, that means, just look back here, that means that in a sense, each buyer is worth less to each seller, okay? Each buyer is worth less to each seller. So the platform with the given number of buyers is not so valuable for the buyers. So what you would get is that fewer sellers would enter, okay? You always have to be rather clear in terms of who is affected. So if pi decreases, the platform is no longer so profitable for the sellers. Okay, buyers are less worth, and that's why the firm reduces the membership fee for the sellers, and it even increases it for the buyers. Okay, because so they still get, in a sense, their same kind of benefit. And of course, just the opposite holds. If pi increases the value one seller gets from a buyer, if it increases, the platform becomes more valuable for the buyer. Excuse me, for the seller, because each buyer is now worth more. Okay, so the utility, the surplus of sellers increases, and therefore, so MS, the blue one, is the membership fee of the buyers, of the sellers. They have to pay more. Okay, that's what we have. And in a sense here, buyers get a better deal. Their price decreases. And what you might be rather surprised to see is that the number is always the same, the number of buyers and sellers. So the platform adjusts its membership fees in a way that these are just, the number of buyers and sellers are just the same. And of course, if the platform becomes more valuable for the sellers in terms of an increase in pi, because each buyer now becomes more valuable, you will have more people on the platform. Despite the fact that here the membership fee for the sellers goes up, it becomes more profitable for them, the membership fee goes up. But in order to ensure that you also get the same number of buyers on a platform, you reduce as a platform these prices. Of course, if N increases, if NS, the number of seller increases, also the utility of buyers increases. Okay? Yeah, hopefully you got some idea. It gets even more complicated in a sense once we change this cost from, or this easiness with which you can join the platform. Okay? Now we change the tau S. We just assume that the seller's parameter here changes. Tau B would be the cost for the buyers. Remember, this was this, oh, I just jump back here, this quadratic part here. Okay, this was this quadratic part, so that means for the guy, with the index 1, it's now rather than 1, it would be 1.2 if that increases. So that is, if it increases, if tau S increases, what does it mean? Now, given the number of buyers and sellers, or in particular, as this relates to the sellers, given the number of buyers, now you will have fewer people on the platform. You will have fewer sellers on the platform. So what you are doing is you decrease the membership fee, okay, in order to make them easier. Okay. But what is rather interesting here, now you also decrease and even stronger the membership fee for the buyer. Why are you doing that? Now, you are losing, if tau S increases, you are losing sellers. Okay, and if you lose sellers on your platform, the platform will be less attractive to buyers. Okay, if you lose women in your nightclub, the platform will be, or the nightclub will be less attractive to men. Okay, and that's why you reduce the membership fees. And you even do that stronger on the other side, because the loss, in a sense, is larger. If you increase tau S marginally, you only lose a very little bit in terms of the surplus of the sellers. But of course, for the buyers, you have these. The change is you, okay, in terms of what you lose for every seller you use. Okay, so in a sense they suffer more if you get fewer sellers. And what is interesting now, and that's why I use this parameter, now you also have an effect. Now you also have an effect on the number of buyers and sellers. Remember here, if tau increases, that makes it more more costly to join a platform for sellers. Okay, and even though the platform decreases its membership fees, this decrease in the membership fee is not sufficient to keep the number constant of sellers, but it is reduced. And so what you do, however, or what is less in terms of an effect is that the effect on the buyers. Okay. So what we really have here, and what is just interesting, and what if you already downloaded the slides, what I put down here is an interesting effect. Okay, suppose here tau s decreases. What does this mean? It is less costly for buyers. It's less costly for sellers to join. So there will be more sellers on the market, and that's a very good thing for the buyers, because they now have a much higher utility because there are so many more sellers now. And that's what we get here in terms of a higher membership fee. Okay, and just the opposite holds if we move into the direction of increased. So here, this is this interesting point about these platforms. You always have to take into account what is the effect if there is a change on one side. If you change a price on one side, what is the effect on the other side? Okay. Here, if it gets easier for sellers to join, utility of buyers will increase a lot. Okay, and that's why you increase the membership fees, and that's what you see here as well. If and this is then somehow expected. If you decrease the tau s, you will get many more sellers than buyers. It's easier to join, and you have then this other effect on the buyers. We have to pay more, and that's what you see here. And then you get this change in the number of firms. Hopefully, this somehow illustrated that. I think we don't have any assignments yet, or any problems in the assignment set right now on that. And so this is in a sense just derived some hour ago, and it took me quite long to derive it, as these are rather complicated expressions. You cannot do that with paper and pencil. You need something like Mathematica to derive that. Hopefully, nevertheless, you got an idea about the involvement you have once you try to find out this optimal structure of membership fees, of usage fees in such monopoly platform. Okay, and finally, what we could also do, and which in a sense is even easier, is to look into platform competition. It's easier in technical terms because here you can just introduce some linear opportunity cost. And what is rather interesting, if you have platform competition, I just want to introduce these terms. You might have single homing or multi-homing. Okay, what does this mean? Single home just means you're just active on one platform. Multi-homing means just that you're active on several platforms. Just think in terms of a newspaper, whereas readers, in Gießen we have two newspapers, the Gießener Allgemeine and the Gießener Anzeiger, whereas people or households typically single home, that is, they only have one of these newspapers. Advertisers typically multi-home, so you will see advertisements of Sommerlaut both in the Gießener Anzeiger and in the Gießener Allgemeine. Okay, if by a single home you have what is called a competitive bottleneck, in a sense, Gießener Anzeiger and Gießener Allgemeine, they both have a monopoly position with respect to the readers they have. Okay, unfortunately for them, Sommerlaut might also run in the meanwhile their advertisements on some social networks, but this is pretty much how it worked. Okay, it certainly does not come next week because we will have your case study part. Perhaps if I have more time, I will present that next year. In particular, and this is just a figure from one of my papers I recently published, I also analyze this effect of multi-homing and what is called exclusivity clauses in the case of shopping centers. So if you're interested in more detail, just go to our professorships, to our chair's website, and you can download this paper. Okay, I think this was the part I wanted to present to you on two-sided markets. Before I move on, I make a short break here and ask for questions in WebEx. Okay, I now move on to our final chapter, Innovation and Antitrust Policy, and what I will particularly focus on is the effect of mergers on the incentive to innovate and invest. Okay, I won't perhaps we could discuss pay for delay in our case studies part, and I won't discuss these exclusivity clauses in two-sided markets maybe next year. What I'm telling you in the next say half an hour or 45 minutes is something I presented last year, actually pretty much at that time, at the Kölner Cartel Rescue, which Professor Thorsten Körber organizes at the Cologne Antitrust Talks. And here's the German title, so I give you the English one. It was about the effect of mergers on the incentives to innovate and to invest. And what you will see is many of the points we dealt with during the course of this semester, of this course, are just the ones which come up here as well. So what is the starting point here? I just give you this cartoon from The Economist. There have been in the last 5 years or so several mergers, in particular in the chemical industries. So for instance, Bayer acquired Monsanto, Dow and Dow Chemical and DuPont merged. Some Chinese company took over. I think this is, I don't know whether this is also Chinese or Swiss. But anyway, you saw many mergers. You also saw many mergers in telecoms in the past, say, 15 years. You saw many mergers in the pharmaceutical industries. And for instance, in the telecoms, the argument always was, if we merge, we have a stronger incentive to invest and to invest in R&D. Here, of course, the point is this is a Schumpeterian argument. So both in terms of size and in terms of market power, they argue that this is a good thing to have in order to provide incentive to invest and incentive to do research. In terms of the pharmaceutical or the chemical industry, the point was always, or the antitrust authorities were afraid of, first of all, of the standard argument in terms of higher margins, higher prices, and the second was that these companies just might shut down different research lines or pipelines. Okay, so if Monsanto tried to develop a similar product, a similar herbicide against something as Bayer, it would be quite likely that they just stop this development. Okay, so what is the starting point? The basic controversy, and you will see this reminds you very much of what we did, is the one between Schumpeter and Arrow. Arrow, that we discussed in great length, that competition increases innovation. Schumpeter is the argument that market power might be good because it gives you greater returns to innovation, and at the same time typically goes hand in hand with with firm size, and larger firms have economies of scale in research and development. And so what we have is a huge discussion between what the intensity of competition has in terms of an effect on the incentives to innovate. Okay, and there was extensive empirical research on that. I already presented that to you, and it always was a mixed results. Okay, Vivers in a recent paper shows that Schumpeter is not so clear after all. And however, what he states is we have Arrow and the cannibalization or replacement effect, which just tells you that a monopoly has a lower incentive to innovate, whereas firms under competition have a higher incentive to innovate. Schumpeter, however, you might, and that's what I did, interpret that in the sense of Gilbert and Newbery, where you have this threat of entry, and under the threat of entry, we saw in this Gilbert-Newbery model is that the monopolist has a strong incentive to innovate, and so of course this is a double-edged sword, because Gilbert-Newbery's paper is called something with do patents allow the defense of the incumbent position? I don't remember the exact title right now, but that was it. Okay, so you might invest a lot in R&D, however you also keep your monopoly position. So all these, you will see, all these are in the first few chapters of our course, and I pretty much just explained or told the audience there what I told you, but I only took 5 minutes for what we did in, say, 2 or 3 lectures. Okay, what is very interesting is the discussion about the so-called U, the so-called inverted U. And here there's a rather interesting paper by Philip Augion, Nick Bloom, Richard Blundell, Rachel Griffiths, and Peter Howard. It's called Competition and Innovation, an Inverted U Relationship. What does this mean? Now here you put on the x-axis, you put the intensity of competition. On the y-axis, you take some measure of innovative activity. They took the patents. And what you see, or what they showed here with this diagram, is that both with a rather low intensity of competition, you have a low level of innovation, and with a rather high intensity of competition, you have a low level of innovation. Okay, and in a sense, some intermediate level of intensity of competition is best in terms of innovation. And what is really interesting here, and that's how they argue as well, is that this diagram, in a sense, puts together Schumpeter and Arrow, and somehow also reconciles Schumpeter and Arrow. Because here, in this part, in a sense, this is the Arrow part, okay? Why? So if you have not very tough competition in a market, and you have high margins, this is just where you have the replacement effect or the cannibalization. So firms don't have a strong incentive to invest in R&D. Here on the other side, you in a sense have the Schumpeter part. Okay, why? If you have cutthroat competition, remember, if you have cutthroat competition, meaning you have Bertrand competition with homogeneous products. If you have then a firm who is ahead of the other firm, who has a cost advantage, what is the incentive for the laggard to catch up to this firm? Actually, if you catch up, your profit will be 0. So you don't have an incentive to catch up. And this is what I just have to look it up in the notes. This is what Augion et al. Call the escape competition effect. So here you don't need to escape competition in a sense, because you cannot, the others cannot catch up anyway. Okay. And so you see, and that's in a sense, you get in a sense the synthesis here, you have the best of all worlds. Of course, there's a lot of, because you have sufficient incentive to innovate and competition is not too tough. Okay. Here, there's a lot of empirical discussion. I think this is one of the most cited papers. And so I really recommend that you look into that. Actually, you might also look into my own dissertation from 1995, and I also produced a similar kind of diagram where I used, and you know that from our discussion of adoption and diffusion of new technology, I used a model of monopolistic competition, and where I had a simple model with a binary R&D technology. That is, you either invest or you don't invest, okay? And you have some fixed cost. And what you see is this alpha, with 1 you have perfect competition, with 0 you would have pure monopoly, but you see here you start investing once it's sufficiently competitive. Okay, before that, if you don't have any competitive pressure, you don't invest in R&D. Only if competitive pressure is sufficiently high, you start investing. But if it gets too high, your margin is too low, so that it's just not worthwhile to invest. Okay, so hopefully one or the other. It's also, you can also download it from my homepage. I would appreciate it, so you would see what I did. Okay, so but what does all that have got to do with merger control? With whether we should allow the merger between Bayer and Monsanto, or when AbbVie just acquires another pharmaceutical company, or whether Deutsche Telekom wants, or actually it was Telefonica, which really bought E+ in Germany. Okay, and the question is, we were talking here about the intensity of competition and the incentive to innovate or incentive to invest. And of course, these firms like telecom companies say, okay, here from this diagram, you see that it's better to have not too intense competition, and we will have higher incentives to innovate. Actually, what Federico, Scott Morton, and Shapiro said in a recent paper is that they even have a section headline called "The Dangerous Economic Literature on Competition and Innovation." They would tell you what I told you above. On these parts is not only unnecessary but dangerous if you relate it to the discussion on mergers. Okay, because the inverted U literature is one of different market characteristics. So you have different market structures, whereas mergers, you have a change in market structure. You change in the industry, you change from 4 to 5, or from 5 to 4, or from 4 to 3 mergers or firms in the market. Okay. What is interesting here, Carl Shapiro was the chief economist, I think, of either of the DOJ or of the FTC in the US. Scott Morton as well. Federico is one of the guys in the competition directorate of the European Commission. Okay. So what they tell you is that an explicit analysis of the incentives to innovate is necessary for mergers. And typically these analysis or these mergers also focus on narrow oligopolies, like where you have in the beginning 5 firms. I don't know, we had 5 firms in Germany at some time in the mobile telecommunications market, and then we have 4. I think Hutchinson never really made it. And then, however, we had 4 to 3 mergers. That was when Telefonica bought E+, and you might also have 3 to 2 mergers, or even mergers to monopoly. Okay, and now there is a lot of, I don't want to go through the detail here, but there is a huge surge in literature on the effects of merger on innovative activity and consumer welfare. And the interesting thing is, it's predominantly written by people who somehow were related to the antitrust authorities, like as I already told you, Shapiro and Scott Morton. It is also Massimo Motta, and I will present his paper here, who was until 4 years ago the chief economist of DG Competition, and also Tommaso Voletti, who was until a year ago the chief economist of the DG, of the Directorate General of the European Commission, Directorate General of Competition. Okay. And they have different approaches, but they all are rather skeptical whether there is any positive view of a merger on innovation. Okay, they would just doubt that we are in a state where we have too much competition, and they would guess that less competition, which is a consequence of allowing a merger from 4 to 3, say, would lead to higher prices, but not to more innovation. Okay, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. We have also some empirical analysis. Justus Haukapp published a nice paper in the International Journal of Industrial Innovation, Industrial Organization, not innovation. They look into the patenting activities and R&D activities in the pharmaceutical sector as a consequence of merger. And they find that we have an adverse effect if we have mergers. Okay, we want to put that into perspective, and what helps you here, what we learned, the kind of mechanisms or the kind of models we learned in this semester. Okay, and what I do is really present a standard model. Actually, we didn't do that so much because we didn't go so much into the detail of the so-called differentiated Bertrand model, but I will explain it to you in effect. So I don't want to tell you these details. This is about merger regulation where you have unilateral effects. I will show you that in passing, and also these from the Motta-Tarantino working paper here. This is already what they tell you in terms of the outcome. They tell you that merger harms consumers unless there are sufficiently strong efficiency gains in these setups, okay? And that's what the others also find, decrease in investment and rise in prices and so on. And that's what we are going to show or to look into right now. What Federico and Langus and Valetti, so I think these both are still at DG Comp, and Tommaso Valetti returned to academia after being the chief economist at DG Comp. So they say, or their conclusion, that a merger between two out of a limited number of innovators, so we have a narrow oligopoly, may lead to a reduction of innovation in a market characterized by limited knowledge spillovers. So they all mention the spillovers, okay, but they are rather skeptical. And the point is that we have unilateral effects, which we call price coordination, which is the standard merger effect. If two firms merge, they have an incentive to increase their prices. And what they have is an innovation externality, which I guess I am explaining in one of the next slide. Innovation externality just meaning that if one of the firms innovates, that hurts its other sister company. Okay? Yeah, possibly negative effects. So what I did there and what I want to do in Cologne and what I want to show you, I show you the world of differentiated Bertrand models, and I call that the ABMO world of competition economists. ABMO just stands for Audi, BMW, and Mercedes. You see here, I don't know, this is a Q5, X3, I think Mercedes is GLA, and so what you have here is differentiated products, and what we assume here is that these firms compete in prices, okay, like Bertrand competition, however, among not homogeneous, but among differentiated products, and of course, you see these are these strongholds of innovation. There will be a lot of innovation, both in terms of product and process innovation. And the Motta-Tarantino model actually analyzes what happens if two of these firms merge. So if in our world, I think it's a BMW and a Mercedes, if they merge, what happens in this world if they merge, and therefore what happens in terms of prices and innovative activity. Okay, Justus Haukapp also analyzed the case in which we have some asymmetry here among. That's why I use this ABM. These are at least they were until recently rather symmetric in terms of what a consumer would expect in terms of the quality, okay? Whereas here you have another company or another car, which would be the Opel Grandland, and this seems to be a lower quality than the other firms, and so you have a different diversion ratio. So if Audi increases the price, if BMW increases the price, it's more likely that people move to Audi and to Mercedes than to Opel. And that would mean you have different diversion ratios. In Germany, lawyers call these Umlenkungsziffer. In the Haukapp et al. Paper I alluded to earlier, they just have such a situation where you have asymmetries. among the firms. I think I don't have time to go into further details, just to illustrate that we could easily implement that as well. And what we are doing is we just use a standard differentiated per draw setup, okay, with this kind of linear demand function. Here with the substitution parameter, this would be the maximum willingness to pay. I just use some arbitrary numbers, which this is an example I first used in the competition policy lecture some 10 years ago. And I just used some arbitrary numbers where we then come up with sensible prices for these cars, okay? And actually, the more you find you will find in your notes to the competition policy lecture we do in the undergraduate, in the bachelor degree studies, where we discuss in more detail merger in such a setup. Okay, so what are we doing next if it works? So how do competition and prices look like in such a world? So this is just a reminder of what we did in competition policy course. In a world without innovation, just assume that there are some variable unit cost. I just used a cost so that we get nice numbers here, a cost of 66,000 for this, and the price will be 77,000, and here you have the quantities. Okay, and so this is straightforward to calculate. And now the interesting thing is what happens if you let, or if BMW decides to merge with Daimler, so that Mercedes is also produced in this joint company. And you will see, and that's what's expected, both firms have an incentive to increase their price. It will increase to 80,000, and the outsider will also increase its price, and at the same time, however, increase its quantity, but it does not increase it so much that the aggregate quantity is as high as previously. So what you have here is what is called a unilateral effect. So no coordination, no collusion, but then the new joint company BM has an incentive to increase the price and to expand its margin. Okay. And now what is already interesting is what do we then expect in terms of incentives to innovate? On the one hand, we have higher margins, and remember, Schumpeter, that's a good thing, okay, more profitable. On the other hand, these firms are now smaller, in particular the merging firms produce less, okay, and this might be negative. At least that's what Motta and the others expect. Now, what we are doing next is looking into process innovations. Looking into process innovations in this world, and you will see here I just used one of our standard cost functions, like in the Gupta-Stiglitz model. You are able to decrease this unit cost by investing in this convex cost investment cost function. Okay, if you want to reduce your variable cost to 65,000, you have to invest 500,000. If you want to reduce to 64,000, you have to pay 2 million. Okay, that's what we have here. Okay. That's just the standard kind of what we have here. So it would be just, yeah, I don't need to do it right now. By 1,000 squared would be 1 million, over 2 would be 500,000, so this is clear. And what I just did then, actually in a setup of, you will notice that of simultaneous decision, okay, like in a Gupta-Stiglitz setup, I think I used this because simultaneously decisions, because Motta and Tarantino also used that. And you will see with independent companies, we get some research, which is then equal to 26,000, so they will reduce their cost, and rather drastically, okay, and so this is then the cost reduction. So it would be 26,000 here. It would be then about 40,000. These new costs, and you get then. Of course, we cannot compare that world with the one without, but you get lower prices here. Okay, that's a good thing after all. You get lower prices if you have this investment possibility. Okay, compared to the previous slide. So we have now much lower cost. That's a first very good thing due to this possibility to reduce our unit production cost. Now, what is interesting now, and I just did all the same we also did previously, just looked into the case if we now only have two firms because BMW and Mercedes merge. And what you will see is, compared to this price here, the price of Audi decreases and the price of the joint company increases. Okay? The price of the joint company should be BM anyway, but the price of the joint company, PB and PM. So both BMWs and Mercedes become more expensive. And what you also see is Audi can increase its market share a lot and its quantity, whereas Daimler and Mercedes just reduce it. Okay, and so what you see here is actually what already Motta and Valetti and all these guys expected to begin with, namely that we have a negative effect on R&D. Remember here CA is now is lower, okay? CB and CM here, not CA, Audi actually invests more in R&D, but the other companies invest more, and on total, on aggregate, the price and quantity increase of the merged firm is not compensated for by the increased price and increased quantity by the outsider here, Audi. Okay, so the margin of the outsider and the quantity increases of the outsider, but overall you have a negative effect on consumers. Okay, there are two things, however. This analysis is a world without efficiencies or synergies. Okay, the investment cost for the merged company is unchanged. So if the BMW and Mercedes were to invest in the new technology independently, and then they joined forces, they would have the same costs once we joined forces as when we were acting independently. So there were no cost savings because you now jointly produce the engine or something like that. And this seems somehow rather unlikely. And what is even more important, this merger is not profitable. The firms would not merge without efficiencies. And that's what you can calculate, and actually probably you even should check that whether I did this calculate correctly, because I think this is a rather interesting result. Without mergers, without synergies, the profit of the merged company will be lower than the profits as soon as they were independent. Why is that? Because they get too soft and they get too small in a sense, and compared to Audi, they are then at a disadvantage and really make losses because they have an incentive to reduce or to increase the price. This makes them so small, and in a sense they cannot commit to the other prices. They always have an incentive to reduce it, and therefore this merger is even non-profitable. So I think I really should check that in more detail, and if someone of you wants to write a thesis on that, I think this is an interesting case because we should publish that, okay? And if before we publish that, of course, we have to cross-check that several times. Okay, so the point is we don't have, we didn't take into account any kind of synergies I have here. Okay, if we don't account any synergies, if we assume this lambda is 0, that means the joint company BMW and Mercedes just have, if they develop something for Daimler and for for BMW, they have to develop it twice. If Daimler, if they belong together, if Daimler develops something, it cannot be used in the other company, okay? And this is somehow a strange assumption, I think, but anyway. So here, if we have some efficiency spillover, which is usually between 0 and 1, if it were 1, that would mean that the joint company would just have the cost only one time and not twice, okay? And this seems also, if we look into the RJV literature we discussed last week or so, this would be a plausible value, okay? And if you then allow for such a spillover parameter, so hopefully this is clear, it just reduces your cost, okay, your investment cost. And if you allow for such a spillover parameter of 1/2, what does this mean? Now the joint company has only 3/4 of the investment cost, so still rather high, okay? And in that case, you would get the same prices as without the merger, but you get at the same time higher R&D and higher profits for the merged company. So in terms of total surplus, you have an increase, okay? And at the same time, you save resources, okay? If the spillover is even higher than lambda equal 1/2, and for instance, if it were lambda equal to 1, the standard from the RJV literature, the consumer surplus, should be consumer here, consumer surplus increases, and from 2/3 on, that's rather interesting. If the spillover is too high, this company gets so potent that they drive out Audi, okay? Because they have such a strong incentive to invest in R&D that their price will be so low that Audi is no longer viable. And now this is just an aside in terms of the merger proceedings. If you have such a merger case, and what does the antitrust authority typically do? They run a market test. They ask the competitors and suppliers and customers of such a company whether they think the merger is good or bad. Of course, if you ask Audi in this situation where you have a lot of spillover, Audi will tell you, oh, that's a very bad merger, okay? Even though in that situation, if lambda is so high, it's really beneficial from a consumer surplus point of view, okay, and from the total surplus point of view. If lambda is smaller than 1/2, but close to 1/2, I seem to have problems with consumer surplus here. Consumer surplus decreases, but the total surplus increases, okay, because profits increase, and that just means you need less investment, which might be important after all, and I will get back to that in a minute. Okay, so this was what I wanted to tell you in this very simple model. Okay, you see immediately what you can derive, and that was the purpose of this analysis. You just take the standard model, look into the effect of merger, and then allow for spillovers, and you will see once you allow for spillovers, and that's why these guys were all very hesitant to claim that or to outright say that the merger is bad, because if you have spillovers, you really might have a welfare increase due to the merger if the spillover is sufficiently high, okay? And you saw that if there is no spillover, it might even be the case that you don't have a problem because the merger is not profitable anyway. So in a sense, that's what that's what you could do in a thesis. Look into the case whether it might be that, or whether it's a case that lambda has to be so high in order for the merger to be profitable that in this case, automatically, for instance, total surplus increases. That would be an interesting point to check. Probably it's not the case, but because the world is not so nice and so rose-colored. But anyway, the point should be clear. What you also can do in this setup, and I don't want to go into the detail here, just to show you, because we in the whole course we always just related to process innovations. Here Botta and Tarantino also look into product innovations. And product innovations, I think I should go down to this diagram here. This is our standard utility function for the linear quadratic utility model. And here you see you might just introduce such a quality parameter A. And if you improve the quality, that just means people are willing to pay more for the Audi or for BMW because it's a better car now, because it has some autonomous driving features and so on. And again, you would just assume that you have some fixed investment costs, which are again quadratic here. And you get very similar results to process innovations. Efficiencies are decisive. You see, I just wrote this. That's why so many typos in it. Efficiencies are decisive. And again, if you have lambda equal to 1.5, you have the same quantities as without the merger, but you have higher R&D and therefore a higher quality and higher prices for the merged company. Okay, but of course this is compensated for in terms or in the view of consumers by the higher quality. Okay, so again, it's decisive what the extent of the spillovers is. Okay, I think there is also another interesting part which also relates to our discussion of patent races and so on, where you have stochastic product innovations. I don't want to go into detail right now. Here, what you do here is that higher R&D leads to higher success probability. That's exactly what we did in terms of our patent race model. Okay, here's this negative spillover parameter or this negative innovation externality I have been discussing previously. That very strange thing that if BMW's quality increases, this reduces the demand for Mercedes. And of course, this assumes that if BMW and Mercedes belong together and BMW increases its quality of the Mercedes is unchanged because they keep their secrets in Munich and don't transfer them to Stuttgart. Okay, and this is somehow a rather heroic assumption, I think. Okay, I'm talking about all these spillovers. Why am I talking about? Because they are so important. And there are, I think I already showed you many different papers where this is shown in the lecture, but here the recent paper by Nick Blom, Mark Schenkerman, and whatever, it's John van Rienen, yes. And they show that technology spillovers operate and that the social rate of return is much larger than the private rate of return. And the socially optimal level being between 2 and 3 times as high as the privately optimal level. And the conclusion, a very recent paper by Lopez and Javier Vives published in the Journal of Political Economy is that these results imply that the internalization of these technological spillovers is a matter of first order welfare importance. So this is really important, and this might really justify, even in a sense, merger which might lead to increased prices. They look into what is called overlapping ownership, which is not really a merger, but a similar thing, because if you have a joint owner, you might also have an incentive to reduce competition between. So if both Daimler and BMW belong to the Quant family will tell them, okay, don't be so aggressive against each other. Okay, and what they tell you, or what they come up as a solution, Lopez and Xavier Vives, is that even cartelized RJV or a merger to monopoly might be optimal. Okay. Okay, there are several other discussions in this discussion of mergers and of innovation. Important is, for instance, pipeline to pipeline overlaps. Just think in terms of our current corona hunt for a vaccine. If you have 2 companies which both have a research project running on a corona vaccine, it might be that if they merge, that they just shut down one product line. okay, one pipeline. And that might lead to a delay in product development. This will lead to less competition in the market for the final product, because we will only have a single of the two product offers. And again, the question is what the importance is, the efficiencies are. The question is whether this is really so important, and it's a rather uncertain prediction, because it takes 10 years or so until you really realize these research gains. And if you think in terms of glyphosate, for instance, the regulatory uncertainty surrounding that is also very important, so that other effects might be much more important here. And of course, similar like in the patent law, we try to prevent inventing around by having sufficient patent breadth in order to have sufficient incentive to innovate. Okay, because competition reduces profitability of these innovations, and so you got less. I then have further nice, I think, references like the one which shows that AMD might be good to spur Intel, but actually it would have been better in terms of investments if Intel would have stayed a monopoly. There's a nice paper by Genakos, Valetti, and Frank Verboven, who evaluate market consolidation in mobile communications. That is, all these 4 to 3 mergers we saw in several countries. We saw in Austria, we saw in Germany, we saw in the Netherlands, and so on. And I think we will see one in UK as well. Of course, I'm biased here because I was involved as an economic expert in one of these 4 to 3 mergers on behalf of one of the parties. But what they show is that even though it led to higher prices, these mergers, at the same time, capital expenditures also increased a lot. Okay, the point is, in a sense, if you don't allow mergers, you will have lower prices, but you don't have coverage. You cannot make phone calls, so put it blatantly, okay? And yeah, on the top, in a sense. So a merger will have static price effects, which are bad, but dynamic benefits for consumers if investments are incentivized, in a sense, okay? Yeah, I'm almost done here. Dennis Carlton is also interesting in terms of what kind of welfare standard we should use, or should we use a total surplus standard or a consumer surplus standard. I think the fixed costs here are the interesting things. And I don't discuss that with you, because these are just some general remarks on the merger review process. And finally, I just want to show you some conclusions and unsolved problems. In a sense, this summarizes what we did in that semester, okay, in this course. Duplication of R&D efforts is an important topic. Is that good or is that bad? Okay, that's and in a certain sense, merger would lead to avoiding this duplication of efforts. And what is then the right welfare standard? How does patent law and competition law interact? So patent law wants to assign a monopoly right. Of course, competition law doesn't like monopolists. Okay, appropriability of research output is always a topic, again, with the patent law. And the question is whether we should, in terms of, for instance, our corona vaccines, should we award patents, or just should we award just a price in a tender or something like that? What we might also discuss is the distributional effects of competition policy. A distributional effect meaning that if we have more concentrated market structure, that might lead to higher prices and adverse effects on consumers. The final point is here actually one related to merger discussion. It's that these Federico, Scott Morton, and Shapiro used cases of where it was obvious that we have abuse, and they draw a rather far-reaching general conclusions. And if we follow these conclusions, we would just declare per se illegal these big mergers. Okay, unless as soon as you're of a certain size and the market share increment is too high, you would just ban this. And this could even provide some protection against hubris, mismanagement, and agency problems. That's all discussed or all topics by all the colleagues like Dennis Müller and Steve Martin. If you think of a merger, of the Daimler-Chrysler merger, the only one who really benefited from that, or the only ones, were probably the management of Daimler, because they had, as they were paid previously, much lower salaries than the guys from Chrysler. They benefited because they got much higher salaries. But the stock owners and also the employees probably didn't benefit so much. Okay, I think I'm done with my lecture, and hopefully you got some idea about what we did here in the last, say, 12 weeks or so. Hopefully this gave you an overview of, in a sense, the last half hour was a really quick refresher of many of the topics we discussed. Hopefully it was clear to you, and yeah, I think I thank you for joining me for the course. I hope that you had some fun. For me it was also fun, but also a lot of work. We'll discuss next week your case studies. We will see your presentations. I'm looking forward to, and I will be available on WebEx now for further questions, and Max will deal with the tutorial class, of course. Thank you and goodbye.